But one of the fundamental premises that we have before we file a case, the police can arrest you on probable cause. When the case comes, when it's funneled down to us, we have to look at the case through a microscope, use our experience to look into a crystal ball, and decide whether or not we can prove the case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. If we cannot, and we do not have a reasonable likelihood of success, we are ethically prohibited from filing the case. I may comment, if I could, and I don't know if it was part of this question, on this accountability, conviction accountability. We have that, Adam, we have that, as you know, in our motions for post-conviction relief. We have so many post-conviction processes that are checks and balance, and we review them diligently, we review them very seriously, and again, I will say that you know, the overall comment from Mr. Warren is that we're, you know, filing things without, if you folks could sit in my homicide meetings with us, if you could look at the great pain that we have in making decisions, and a great review of these facts, perhaps we wouldn't be having this discussion now.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dolman.
Hi, Gary Dolchin. As a fellow candidate out on the field, you guys get to know a lot about each other. So in the spirit of unity, have you learned anything positive about the other candidate? Perhaps a policy idea that you would say, hey, they came up with a good idea. Maybe that's something that I'll do if I'm elected to the next term.
Thank you, Gary. Go ahead, Mark.
You're acting like a judge already. Which is a good question. I will tell you what, Gary, I haven't got to know Mr. Warren well, but we're respectful. We meet. I've met his wife. He's met my children. So we're in this, even though we're opponents, we're in this together for the common good. So I'm sure whatever happens in November, we can sit down and talk. And we have a lot to learn. I've learned this over the years from one another. I learned from my young prosecutors, I learned something every day. From people that the life of law is a life of study, so we have a lot to share. We both care about the community, and I've been honored to talk to him in the limited fashion that I have.
Mr. Warren.
Gary, first of all, congratulations on the win on Tuesday. And your question is sounding more like a mediator than a judge to me, but Mark and I actually haven't really talked policy, but we've been very friendly, and it's great that we're able to keep the substance of the issues that's important to the community as the subject of debates. And you know, we've been amicable with each other, and I hope that continues over the next 2 months as we continue to educate the community on issues that are important to them, about how we build a safer community here, about how we fix problems in our criminal justice system, about how we change the culture of the office, about how we move forward to bring our criminal justice system in Hillsborough into the 21st century.
Okay, thank you, sir. You can hang on to the mic. You can go first next time if you want. Ms. Gray.
As an educator, I took note, Mr. Warren, of your statement about paying more attention to the larger crimes versus the smaller. It's been my experience that the culture, now this question is really for Mark, I feel like the culture of crime should be addressed at its very minimal level. If we take the small crimes and pay a lot of attention to it, then the larger networks will be more discouraged. I am reminded of the New York City, I think it was Mayor Bloomberg, paid a lot of attention to the smaller crimes, graffiti, things of the speeding tickets, little things, cleaning up the city, making it safer, the perception. So, Mark, what's your feeling on handling and facing the smaller crimes in our city versus the larger?
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mark?
I grew up in the public school system here, and I taught at Hillsborough Community College for 10 years. I get the nature of the question, and I want to tell you some words from a judge named Robert Mann that was the chief judge of the 2nd District Court of Appeal. And he said that we receive our statutory law from the legislature, its interpretation from our Supreme Court, agreeing with some, disagreeing with some, but following all, because our bondage to the law is the price of our freedom. So the issues that you talk about, and I get where you're going, and I want to be direct. There's a lot of social issues, if you will, that perhaps you're talking about, but it's important to know that we do not, we have, and if you're talking about the prosecution of minor crimes, there's certainly a hierarchy in what we look at from a sentencing perspective. But we go to school, we tell our children, if you don't like the law, change it. We look at the hierarchy of what a petty theft, I'm being absurd, should not be treated like a robbery. So I get that, but when we look at it as prosecutors, you know, we got DUI cases, we've got petty theft cases. You know, the big, and I don't want to call it a controversy, but what is on our public mind now is, you know, marijuana and what we're doing with the children to make certain that we're set up very well to change behavior. You know, our office, if you get a DUI, you're going to go to school. If you, in some domestic violence cases, you know, we have diversion programs. But we're trying to...
And Mark, I hate to interrupt you, but we're about 30 seconds over your time.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's all right.
My apologies, I was looking for you.
Yeah, I went to the back. Here's where our next questions come from. Mr. Ward, go ahead.
Mr. Gray, congratulations as well for Tuesday. We all want safe neighborhoods. The problem is that for a generation, we've had this tough on crime philosophy that tends to treat everyone who comes into the criminal justice system as if they're threats to our community, and they're not. If we really want to be tough on crime, we have to be smarter on crime. That starts with reallocating resources to focus on the crimes that pose the biggest threats to our community. The gang violence that takes the lives of innocent bystanders here in Tampa over the last few years. Domestic violence and rape and child abuse and economic crime that I mentioned before. We have to be smart on crime as well in terms of distinguishing between where to be tough, the people who really need to be locked up and have the key thrown away, versus those people who deserve a second chance, who end up in the criminal justice system because either a mistake or mental health problems or substance abuse. Lastly, we need to be smart on crime because we've been so focused on just retribution, punishing criminals. We've lost focus on the other three goals of the criminal justice system: reducing recidivism, rehabilitating offenders, and protecting the rights of victims. So by changing that philosophy from one of just punishing criminals to one of actually making our community safer, we'll achieve the goals that we're supposed to with a safer community.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Belcher?
Yes, Elizabeth Belcher. This is for Mr. Ober. It's essential to have the impression of neutrality. So why didn't you turn over the investigation of the County Commission in Parsons-Brickhoff to an outside agency?
Well, if you, and I'm not sure what your, with all due respect, what your interest is in that as other than a citizen, but we are able, we deal with issues of that nature every day. And if Mr. Warren believes that getting contributions from individuals is a problem. We conflict off every case. If I know a conflict when I have a conflict, and there was not a conflict there because, quite frankly, after the investigation was complete with the two individuals, it's now public that the two people that were in essence the whistleblowers had no information to give. And I have said it before and I'll say it again, that was a colossal waste of our resources for the sheriff to do that. It was a colossal waste of my office's resources to review that. No crime had been committed. It wasn't close.
And why did you call out one of the county commissioners?
I'm sorry, we'll let Mr. Warren respond to it. Go ahead.
My opponent just said, I know a conflict when I have a conflict. The problem with that statement is that there's a conflict in it. We don't get to judge ourselves when we have a conflict of interest. And so the investigation that you mentioned is a prime example of a type of case where there's a perceived conflict. The case should be referred to another agency. Because where you have such an entrenched relationship between the state attorney's office and the sheriff and certain elected officials, whatever it may be in a particular case, that the public views that as a conflict of interest, then you've already lost the battle before the investigation has started. Which is why we need to be willing to refer investigations out, again, across the Bay to Pinellas, up to Tallahassee, up to Washington if necessary, so that not only they're investigated and decisions are made based on the facts, but so that we uphold and maintain the public's confidence in the integrity of the investigation.
Thank you, sir. Just so everybody knows, we got time for 3 more questions. We got Ms. Williams, Ms. Coleman, and Ms. Sink, and then we'll move on to closing. So, Ms. Williams.
Thank you. My first question is to State Attorney Mark Ober. About 2 weeks ago, the Florida Sentinel printed in their paper, after they copied and pasted it from the Tampa Bay Times regarding the e-warrants. It kind of sent the community in a spiral of outrage because they want, well, including myself, we want to know why wasn't community meetings held regarding that new policy regarding e-warrants. My second part of my question is to Mr. Warren. Could you hold this from a second?
Yes, ma'am. Just so you know, you got about 5 more seconds to get your question out.
Okay, Mr. Warren, you said that those guilty men, they were prosecuted because they were guilty. Well, the federal judge, you got to get up pretty early in the morning to fool this activist. The documents from the U.S. Department of Justice up in Washington, D.C. said that all 4 of those men were acquitted. They were found not guilty. Don't throw shade.
Okay. I guess we'll let Mr. Warren address that first since that was directed to it's in there at the end. We'll come back to you, Mark.
Okay.
We'll come back to you. Yeah.
Ma'am, again, with all due respect, your question shows a lack of understanding for how the system works. We only charge innocent people. And it's not prosecutors that charge people, it's grand juries. So in that case, the grand jury indicted people who were innocent because they're innocent until proven guilty. That's a fundamental principle of our criminal justice system. As I talked about before, it's a tough case that you have to be willing to take to safeguard the community. And you have to be willing to do the right thing when the circumstances change in a case. So the fact that my successors felt the need to stop and reevaluate the evidence is an example of doing the right thing, not simply just chasing a conviction.
Okay, Mr. Ober.
E-warrants, whole different subject matter. And an e-warrant is an electronic warrant that we have been working on for about a year. The legislature suggested that we do that, the state attorneys, and the system locally. So my counterpart, Ed Brodsky, in the 12th Circuit, has an e-warrant system up and running, and it's a very complicated, there are so many parties to that process. Your question is, Michelle, why didn't the public get involved? In my opinion, that's a law enforcement function. And you can see the security issues that are involved in doing that. We're working on that right now. It's going to expedite, ultimately, the arrest of people so we don't have continued violence in those type of cases.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Coleman?
Jean Coleman. I want to focus on sexual battery crimes, child abuse, and domestic violence. Could both of you address your specific experience in prosecuting or defending those crimes, and how that experience, that specific experience, would assist you in leading prosecutors in your office on making good judgment decisions on how to handle those cases?
Sure. I've had Mark.
Thank you. If I can, Gene, I'm going to blow your cover, if I may. Ms. Coleman was the head of our sexual offender unit years ago. Not when I was state attorney. We worked together, and we tried several cases together back many years ago. I have had extraordinary experience in those cases. I have prosecuted those cases. A big media case, a guy called the Boutique Bandit, was charged with multiple counts of sexual battery. Again, his true name was Albert Stromer. We take those cases, obviously, those are at the top of the list, especially when you have sexual predators that are preying in our communities. And we go down, domestic violence. Mindy Murphy is here from the spring. We talk about those issues too, because the potential there, if you look at a domestic violence case, and let me find, where's Adam? Because
I'm over here, Mark. You got about 20 seconds.
That's fine. If you look at a county court domestic violence case, maximum penalty is a year in a county jail, which means people are going, we're not going to lock up and throw away the key. What we do is punish them and try to change behavior. And we have a real issue too, very difficult cases. If you've tried them on the state side or defended them, very difficult cases, because generally, maybe overbroad, a lot of the times you have the victim, they don't want to participate, they don't want to show up. So we end up trying some of those without, but we try to change behavior of the defendant. So hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Warren?
So as I described before, I cut my teeth prosecuting street crime in state court in DC, and ended up prosecuting some of the most complicated cases across the country, which gives me a broader experience and a broader diversity of understanding of how to handle cases all over the boardroom again. But the concern we have here is the focus on certain crimes, and this goes to a question I was asked before, takes away from the resources we have to investigate more serious crimes. And we can't let cases fall through the cracks, especially child abuse and sexual assault cases. And I'll give you an example of a case that made the news a few months ago, about a 15-year-old girl who was made a sex slave by an older man living in Washington, D.C. And that case wasn't prosecuted by the state attorney's office. In the local news, it was Mike Deason from Channel 10 News showed up at the state attorney's office demanding answers. How come this horrific case, a girl who had been turned into a sex slave, whose mother was essentially crying to the news when she discovered it, hadn't been prosecuted? Now, Mr. Ober, I don't think was in the office that day, but another representative from the office who was answering questions wasn't even sure what was going on and said, had we known about the facts of the case, we certainly would have investigated. Well, Mike Deason, being prepared, pulled out the sheriff's report, detailing the evidence and the allegations signed off by the state attorney's office declining to prosecute the case. It was only after Channel 10 News ran multiple stories about this that the state attorney's office decided to reopen that investigation. Now, in the end, they ended up reopening it and charging the individual. And so we're on the right path. But the problem I have is that justice was delayed for that victim and for that family for several months, while a sexual predator was allowed to potentially commit more violations on other innocent juveniles. And we're not sure if that prosecution ever would have occurred had the news not sort of shamed the state attorney's office into reopening the investigation.
All right, Mr. Ober, yeah, I think that one probably does warrant a little bit of a response. I'll give you about 60 seconds to come back.
Well, yeah, Mr. Warren does not know the facts of the case. we were looking at the case at the time Mike Deason called us. Mike Deason has apologized about the report that he put on that indicated that he brought it to our attention. I have a picture of what I call a sex slave, and by no means do not read between the lines. This young girl, this man has committed a crime, so don't read between the lines here. She was with him voluntarily. She flew to see him. The mother has met on multiple occasions with Rita Peters, the head of my sexual offender division, and we are prosecuting the individual on computer-type events. And I believe he was arrested, I may have the state wrong, he was arrested in New Jersey or somewhere on the coast and brought back. So while we can talk about and consent is not an issue, don't misunderstand me. He committed a crime. Okay. We differ on, I know the facts of the case. Thank you.
Thank you. And just because you went a little over, Mr. Warren, give you about 30 seconds if you need it on that one, or are you good? Okay. All right, then our last question is going to come from former state CFO, Ms. Sink, and co-host of Common Ground. Is it correct with oh, sorry about that. Whoops, I was trying to give you a plug and I screwed it up. Here you go, Ms. Sink. Last question.
Thanks. So we had primary election on Tuesday. 2 state attorneys were not reelected in Orange County and also in Jacksonville. And I don't know the specifics of all this, but it just goes to show that if you're the incumbent state attorney, fortunately, you're out here engaging in these debates, which we're glad to hear about. But my specific question is this. I know more about Angela Corey, who was the probably 12-year state attorney in Jacksonville incumbent. And she has a reputation of aggressively prosecuting juveniles for on the basis of adult crimes, more or less. And the community finally raised up and elected her. I can't even talk this morning. Got hurricanes in my mind. She lost her election. I think the vote was like 60% for the challenger versus 40% for Angela Corey. But my question is, for each of you, what is your approach to how you charge juveniles who have committed crimes of murder, etc.?
Well, thank you, Madam CFO. We have worked together when I was president of the Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association, and when you look at the big debate, if you will, over direct file, we do that in a very cautious, thoughtful method. But I can tell you, in no uncertain terms, when we direct file a juvenile to adult court, that person is dangerous to our safety. My obligation is to protect you, and I can make a distinction between someone that is a risk, and I will give you 2 examples. One I prosecuted years ago, a young man, 14 years old, named Kevin Moore, that killed a student in his school with a book strap out in the field and wrapped a tourniquet around her neck and stuck a stick up her to make it look like a sexual battery. Mr. Moore was 14 at the time, and I do not pound my chest about what happens with these young people. Go out and drive by the Bloomingdale Library, and you will see a young man that committed a rape of an elderly home care worker a year prior to beating this woman, this young student that was going to the University of Florida. She will never, ever, ever recover. So I take seriously the juveniles that are dangerous, and if you look, any of you call me and say, give me the list of the people that you've direct filed on, I believe you will say, thank goodness you're doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Ober. Mr. Warren?
Ms. Singh, first with regard to your question about the other state attorneys' races, those incumbents lost because people are fed up with a criminal justice system that's mishandling our tax dollars and not protecting our neighborhoods. And you mentioned the juvenile justice issue with regard to Duval County. With all due respect to Mr. Ober and the couple cases he referenced, the facts say otherwise. Hillsborough County is an outlier in the state of Florida in the number of cases that are direct filed, kids charged as adults. We've been an outlier for 16 years. We're one of the worst in the state, worse than Duval County, where the incumbent was just voted out, one of the worst in the country. And Human Rights Watch, third-party organization, not Mr. Ober telling you what a good job he's done, but a third-party organization issued a report 2 years ago singling out Hillsborough County as one of the worst in the country for the number of juveniles we charge as adults and the racial disparity in charging juveniles. And the fact is that the vast majority of direct files are for non-violent offenses. So while my opponent says that these people are dangerous to the community, the facts suggest otherwise. As state attorney, we need to do a better job. We need to not be an extreme outlier in how we handle juvenile justice. We need to embrace reforms that other cities have used so that we're charging the worst of the worst as juveniles as adults where warranted, tough on crime where necessary. But we're also being smarter about how we steer juveniles, especially nonviolent offenders, away from the downward spiral of the criminal justice system. Because every time we saddle them with a conviction record, we make it harder for them to become a tax-paying, law-abiding, contributing member of society in the future.
Mr. Ober, this is one of those situations where I think you should be able to respond. 60 seconds to respond, and Mr. Warren, if you need to reply after his response, you'll have 60 seconds as well, then we'll move to closings.
You know, the comments, and I've learned over the years to remain calm, are offensive to my staff because an outlier, I don't know what publications Mr. Warren reads, these issues about all the very difficult decisions we make regarding juveniles. But you can go again, I invite you. Let's look at the people. Does everybody need to go to prison? Of course not. Do we file every case in adult court? Of course not. We are doing what he suggests now. And quite frankly, if you looked at the people that have committed these crimes, another one comes to Varus Knight. Another one comes to mind that raped a woman at Copeland Park years ago in front of her 3 children with a gun. He is dangerous to our community, pure and simple.
Mr. Warren, you have 60 seconds for a reply there, and then we'll move to closings. And after this answer, Garfield Committee deliberate during closings. Thank you.
And again, with all due respect to Mr. Ober, finding a couple examples of cases where, egregious cases, where juveniles should be charged as adults doesn't address the fact that we're charging more juveniles as adults than anywhere else. And that's according to Human Rights Watch from 2014. That's the source we're reading. But thank you for your question.
Not your turn.
2 of the most important issues that a state attorney faces are with regard to death penalty cases and juvenile justice, because they're arenas where easily prosecutors can sort of flex their muscles